It began on a morning so ordinary that no chronicler thought at first to write it down as anything more than a small theft. A wooden bucket, plain oak bound with iron, lowered into a public well in Bologna to draw clear water for the city's bakers and altars, then hoisted skyward and carried away by men from the neighbouring commune of Modena, as if it were a prize taken in sport. The year was 1325, the heart of the early 14th century, and Italy was a mosaic of proud cities where honour, like land or coin, could ignite war. To the casual eye, the object was insignificant, a tool of everyday life, more useful than beautiful, a thing that belonged to no noble household and therefore seemed beyond the world of banners and heralds. But in the language of communes and families, where memory and insult accumulated like barnacles on a hull, an act small enough to be swallowed by fog could grow teeth overnight. Bologna and Modena had been enemies for generations, their borders a thin, violent line, their quarrels layered atop each other, ancient disputes over irrigation, guild privileges, marriages arranged and broken, so that when a Modenese soldier walked into Bologna with a bucket on his shoulder, he carried with him a code of provocation. To steal the bucket was to say plainly that Modena would not be humiliated by its neighbour. To let the theft pass unpunished was to invite derision. So the matter, which might in any other time have been settled with a fine or a public apology, became instead a lit match in dry tinder. The municipal council in Bologna met in fury. Assemblies crowded with burghers and magistrates declared outrage and demanded restitution. Negotiations, where they happened at all, crumbled beneath the weight of insult. Modena scoffed at the demands. The bucket hung in their towers like a joke made permanent. In the politics of northern Italy, there were deeper currents, the Guelph and Ghibelline schism, the tug between papal and imperial influence, the way merchant wealth and feudal pride tangled like brambles. Both cities recruited allies, not only among their own people, but among condottieri and neighbouring lords who scented profit in the quarrel. Men who made war as a living found in a stolen bucket a license to draw their blades for pay. By the autumn of 1325, murmurs had hardened into muster calls, banners were sewn, armour polished, and the fields outside the towns became a kind of theatre where blood would be the only accepted applause. The two forces met near the hamlet of Zappolino, fields that would, for a short day, be the centre of the world for those who fought there. Numbers favoured Bologna. Chroniclers record their ranks as larger, their levy called from the city gates in a confident wave. But in war, size can be a river that drowns itself, and the Modenese used the cunning of terrain, speed, and the brutal discipline of men who had nothing left to lose but their honour. The clash was fierce. Cavalry struck like iron jaws. Infantry held lines with pikes and shrieks. Banners became ragged flags of desperation. The noise of battle filled the valley. Horns blared, horses screamed, the sky darkened with dust. Men fell not as names, but as falling bodies. A butcher, a baker, a young clerk who had never seen the horizon before that day. The Bolognese line, confident in their numbers, found the Modenese flank like a blade at the ribs. Panic moved down their ranks, and retreat dissolved into rout. When the dust settled, the fields were strewn with the wreckage of a commune's pride, broken standards, discarded helmets, the silence of men who would never again set bread on their family table. The Modenese emerged with their treasure, the oak bucket, now invested with meaning no wood could bear on its own. They carried it back and hung it as proof and provocation in Modena's Torre della Ghirlandina, a bell tower that would, for centuries, host the object as if it were a relic. To the victors it was a trophy. To the defeated it was a wound that would not heal. Historians in calmer eras would debate the truth behind the legend. Was the bucket the true cause, or merely a spark set to a field already dry from factional hatred? They would insist on nuance, on the layers of trade disputes, political marriages, and the ruthless mercenary economy that made petty quarrels escalate. But for those who marched and bled and stumbled through the mud of Zappolino, nuance was an abstraction for scholars. The immediate narrative was simple and brutal. A neighbour had taken what was theirs, and they had answered with steel. The war that began over a stolen bucket thus became a parable about honor's dangerous weight in a world where small things could topple cities. In the years that followed, the tale grew like an oral fungus, emboldened songs in taverns, ballads that turned the theft into a moral, the battle into a test of civic virtue. Pilgrims and visitors would point up at the Girlandina and see, nailed inside, the dark wood that had cost so much blood. Each generation chose its own lesson. Some said it proved the folly of pride, others used it to stir fresh rivalries. And beneath every retelling lay the same truth. Men and cities will risk everything for the preservation of face, for the refusal to be laughed at. In that refusal they commit themselves to violence, and violence writes its own script into history. The bucket, inert and small, remained. But the story it came to carry, about honor, about provocation, about how easily a spark can become a conflagration, stayed alive. A warning and a curse whispered in the shadow of Modena's tower. Let us go back then, to the beginning, not to the clang of steel or the roar of battle, but to a quieter theft, so absurd in its simplicity that it still strains belief. The year was 1325, and the air between Bologna and Modena was already thick with resentment. These were not just neighboring cities. They were rival powers, proud communes in the patchwork of medieval Italy, bound together by trade routes yet divided by politics, alliances, and the long shadow of the Guelph and Ghibelline feud. Bologna, prosperous and populous, leaned toward the papacy. Modena, smaller but no less proud, tilted toward the Holy Roman Emperor. Between them stretched a border as fragile as it was contested, and every insult, real or imagined, gnawed at the fragile peace. The insult that broke it came in the form of a wooden pail. It happened in a skirmish so minor that it barely merited mention in the chronicles, at least at first. A group of Modenese soldiers, riding into enemy territory, found themselves in Bologna's main square. There, outside a well in the heart of the city, hung a bucket, oak banded with iron, weathered by years of use. It was not gold, not jeweled, not sacred. It was to all appearances a humble tool, and yet they took it. Why? Perhaps as a joke, perhaps as a dare, perhaps because in times of tension, even the smallest theft can become an act of defiance. They slung it over a horse and galloped home. The people of Bologna demanded its return. Modena refused. It was not the value of the bucket that mattered, it was the principle. To give it back would be to admit humiliation. To keep it was to turn that humiliation into a banner. In a world where honor outweighed reason, neither side could afford to yield. By autumn, the insult had swollen into a war. Bologna called upon its allies, raising an army that some chroniclers claimed numbered 30,000. Modena, though smaller, summoned its own, men hardened by years of defending their city's pride. The clash came at Zappolino on November 15th, 1325. It was not a battle of ideals or ideology. It was a battle of will. The hills echoed with the sound of hooves, the scream of arrows, the thunder of pikes meeting shields. By day's end, Bologna's army was broken, driven back in humiliation. Some say 2,000 lay dead, others say the losses were fewer, but the psychological wound ran deeper than any casualty list. And through it all, the bucket remained in Modena. It was not hidden. No, its value lay in its display. They hung it in the Torre della Ghirlandina, their city's tallest and proudest tower, where it could be seen and remembered. It was a trophy, yes, but more than that, it was a statement. Generations came and went, empires shifted, the Guelph and Ghibelline feud faded into history, but the bucket stayed. And in its stubborn survival, it carried a lesson, that wars are not always born of vast ambitions or sweeping injustices. Sometimes they are sparked by something small, something absurd, an object that becomes more than itself in the crucible of pride. The bucket, inert and small, remained, but the story it came to carry, about honor, about provocation, about how easily a spark can become a conflagration, stayed alive, a warning and a curse whispered in the shadow of Modena's tower.